Greetings, gaming historians, and welcome to Lord of Lore, where we break down the lore and history of our favorite games and fantasies. As you all know, the world of Amalur has a deep and rich history for its lands, its races, and even its gods, but the story of reckoning doesn't begin until the Crystal War during the Age of Arcana. Although there are plenty of lore stones and books to give us some hints, many of us have asked, what was the history of the world before the game? Now, disclaimer, there is so much history for each race and kingdom, including the Colossi, the Masarial, the Uranus Alliance, and the Tirgash, that it would be impossible to squeeze it into a short little video. Today, we're going to be focusing on the general history of the world as perceived by the main races, the Alfar and the humans. Let's discuss. The most ancient of texts and legends tell that in the beginning, there was the Deep Gloam, a time of darkness and unrecorded history that was only survived because the mortal races were in hiding. The whats and hows are debated by scholars, but eventually, the Deep Gloam passed and the first mortal races began to emerge. One of the first and oldest races to emerge were the ancient Alfar, but upon coming to the home their ancestors spoke of, they found it a frozen wasteland. However, in spite of the harsh conditions, the Alfar braved the icy wilderness to establish a new home, Glen Suthane, where they learned to love their traditions and how to harness powerful magics. As the Alfar settled the lands of Alfaria, the main power of the early kingdoms belonged to the Empire of Arathel, an immensely powerful but mysterious race that embodied order. For unknown reasons, however, the empire disappeared, perhaps ascended, and without their leadership, tribal warfare began to dominate the world, with only the Losofar, the Gnomes, and the Matharans remembering their teachings. This is where Amalur begins to deviate from other fantasies. While most stories are told from the perspective of humans, most of Amalur's history and growth were thanks to the Alfar, and the races of humanity were just another scattered race of tribes in the harsh lands of Fortinmar. In Alfaria, the main race, Losofar, grew to despise the chaos and change around them, freezing their home to forever remain. Some of their cousins, however, had a different philosophy, embracing change and delving into new kinds of magic. Humans, meanwhile, fought for survival against the giants of the Uranus Alliance and the savage Tirgash. Whenever the humans did grow to establish a united force, it was rarely for the better. The first great alliance of men was the tribe of Durek, savage warriors that pillaged the land. In the Durek's destruction, many gnome settlements, artifacts, and orders were destroyed. The Durek even spilled into Alfaria, slaughtering and raiding all they came across. However, one skirmish ended up with the Losofar heir dead. Filled with wrath, the Alfar retaliated with brutal force, especially the Losofar cousins that sought to drive the Durek into extermination. After the war was over, the Losofar declared justice delivered, but their vengeful cousins disagreed. This resulted in a political schism, and the two elven kingdoms realized that they could no longer live together. The cousins of the Losofar that embraced change and emotion left their homeland to become the Dakelfar, eventually settling into the northern plains of Arathel in their capital city of Rathir. However, the threat of humanity did not end after the early kingdoms. In the Korthian Age, a new republic known as the Korthian Empire grew to prosper in the resource-rich lands of southern Adelia. Though peaceful at first, their ever-growing wealth led to decadence and greed, and they began to conquer and enslave their neighbors, even allying with the Verga in their slave trade. This reign continued for centuries, but it eventually fell when the races united to defeat them in the Ragosh Rebellion. In one last act of defiance, the Korthians somehow released a plague that killed many people. As a result, the Korthian Age is considered one of the darkest pages in Amalur history, and few races have loved the Verga since. After the downfall of the Korthians, powers of the Eastern world began to focus on their own ideals and goals to avoid repeating the mistakes of the Korthians. The peaceful Masarial became peaceful entertainers and winemakers. The goblinoid Krimble dived into the realm of scholarship with the help of the gnomes, and the barbaric Colossi underwent such a change that they soon grew into one of the most cultural kingdoms in all of Amalur. Meanwhile, the human descendants of the Matharans did their best to recover from the hardships of the Durek and the Korthians. In their time of weakness, an army of gnolls sought to push these settlers back, but a hero arose from these settlers known as Balforth Almir, a tactical genius and devout follower of Mitharu, god of order. Gathering the surrounding villages into the first human alliance seen in years, he successfully pushed back the gnolls and founded Port Miria, the pinnacle of their trade and brotherhood. Though reluctant, he eventually gave in to popular demand and became their king, establishing the Almain Kingdom, the first major human kingdom since the Korthian Empire. But in all the history, The Alfar stood atop it all, being the greatest practitioners of magic and founding many arcane schools, such as the Order of Ash and the Scalia Arcana. Because no other race could grasp magic as the elves did, the Alfar were the dominant race in Amalur. However, something began to stir in the Feylands, something that granted the powers of magic to the lesser races. In this time of change, a new power rose that would divide the Feylands into the Crystal War, something that would forever change fate.